tree ID / just a great walk
Mhm.
following, which if the weather's going to be nice, that'd probably be really good. Make
It
it a
was the
good
first
crowd.
time that we did that, and that's why I'm excited to do it again.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody who's joining. We're going to get started in just a minute. Glad you're here tonight.
Well, the last weather forecast I saw for Sunday was later in the day. It's supposed to rain, so I'm hoping I can get out in the woods with a chainsaw for a little bit of time.
Yeah, that'd be
I've got
good.
some Jeep trails that need to be cleared.
Oh, geez. Very good. All right. Well, I guess we should be respectful of people's time. We should get started. Obviously, people can still join us, but you guys ready to begin? Wow, January 2023's Backyard Forestry. Crazy. So anyhow, welcome everybody. I'm Lori Jensen, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Forestry Association. Again, we're really super glad you're here tonight. We've been doing this for quite a few years. Online started when COVID hit, but Backyard Forestry itself, it's been many years, started with in-person events, and now here we are. So we're glad you're here. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. So if you want to pop in and say hello, please do. We are also asking that people put any questions that they might have for the presenter, John, in Q&A, and we'll address them when he's done with his presentation. So moving right along, Andy, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, just real quick on the Q&A, there's a note from Clark. It says chat is disabled.
No. Why would that be? That
Don't
happened one other time. That's weird. Okay, I'm not sure if I can fix that since we're already live. So I'll tell you what.
If chat doesn't work, Clark got it into Q&A. So
okay, so if you want to say hello, feel free to say so in the Q&A. How's that? Sorry about that. I'm not exactly sure why that happened. So I copy the webinars over from one month to the next, so that should not have happened. Anyhow, hi Andy, how are you?
I'm good. How is everybody today?
I'm good.
I'd like to add my welcome to Lori's, and glad that we have our old friend John Hooven with us tonight. We'll be talking about understanding forest health, but there's some other things coming up that we hope everybody is aware of, or if you're not aware of it, you will be shortly. The most important thing is that we have Backyard Forestry Online, which is the third Thursday every month, which is today. But then coming up, we have some other things as well, which are very important. We're going to be able to have the annual meeting of the New Jersey Forestry Association in person. It'll be March 18th. It's pretty much an all-day session. We're planning to be back to Rutgers at the Cook Campus Student Center. I haven't been there in 3 or 4 years, so it's going to be great to be able to get back. We're putting together a pretty informative and exciting agenda for everybody. We've got some great speakers lined up, some great topics to talk about. So save the date, March 18th, NJFA 48th annual meeting, and again, Rutgers Cook College Student Center. So stand by, there'll be more information coming out on that. Keep your eyes open to the mailbox and the virtual mailbox. So, we talked about the Forestry Association. We've been through this before, all the great things that you can get by joining NJFA. Certainly, we mentioned the annual meeting. It's going to be great to get back together with everybody. We have the Woodland Stewards Program, which John Hooven is so involved with, and also Backyard Forestry, which is tonight. So, there are some great benefits to joining NJFA, particularly if you're a woodland owner.
All right. Well, thank you, Andy, for that. And if anybody isn't a member and they want to join, you can do so right on our website, or we're happy to send you a membership remittance envelope. So we're happy to do that. So it is my pleasure actually to introduce our presenter today, John Hooven. Known you for quite a few years now, right? His resume now includes being a forester with the Maryland Forest Service. Oh, you're a Woodland Stewards. Look at that. Actually, that's where we met. So he is now he started out being a participant in the Woodland Stewards program and is now actually the facilitator. So that's awesome. And of course, he is a member of the board of directors of the Forestry Association. So welcome, John. Thank you for today. I'm going to stop sharing so you can start sharing. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And of course, adding to my resume, I am now also, as of February 13th, I will no longer be with Maryland Forest Service, but with the University of Maryland Cooperative Extension as the stewardship educator down there. So
Congratulations.
welcome everybody. Thank you. And thank you for, sorry, I blocked my own screen. Thank you for stopping out tonight. I expect that we'll have a good presentation, hopefully. And we're talking a bit about updating you on understanding forest health. What I'll do is we'll jump right into the presentation. And I hope this works out okay because I only had a week to put it together. So we'll see how it goes. So
Looks good, John.
Okay. So understanding forest health. I'm going to start off with our lovely assistant down here in the right-hand corner, and we're going to play a game called Pick the Healthy Forest. So without any further delay, actually, I was thinking about trying to get a survey going, but I'm not going to muddy the waters a little bit. We'll just do this impromptu. So basically, we have 4 pictures of forest up here. And we have Forest A, Forest B, Forest C, and Forest D. So,
hey, John, if you want me to pop up a poll, I can now create them on the slide. So do you want me to do it or no?
Yeah, if you could, because I'd like to see what the audience's feedback is with regard to these. Okay.
All right.
So these are 4 forests, 2 different ecosystems, 2 different states. But the idea is that, I basically want to get an idea from the audience whether or not, your choice of which forest you think is healthy, A, B, C, or D. And Lori, let me know when you're ready for that.
Okay, here it comes. Let's see, just healthy forest. Tell me if you see this.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. So we'll leave this up for a second. So again, choices are A, B, C, and D. A and B are both pine barrens forest. C and D are both spruce plantation forest.
At the moment, we have 75% participation.
Okay.
I'll keep you posted. We're up 79%. Can you see the responses, John?
No, I can't.
Okay. We're at 81.
We'll close in 15 seconds. 14, 13, 12, 11. Well, the anticipation's building. If you hadn't made a choice, please do so. Whenever you're ready, Lori, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. And here come the results. Can you see that?
Here we go. So healthy forest. We have B and C are very close to each other and tying. 39% and 41%. Choice A, surprisingly 12%. That's very interesting. And choice D is 7%. That was a bit of an outlier. That's quite interesting. That's surprising. It really didn't work out the way I expected, but that's one thing that's a little bit deceiving about healthy forest is the idea that it's aesthetically pleasing, and that's not always the case. Actually, there is no correct answer, and I know that's probably disappointing to you all. But let me go over these really quickly. So A is actually a preserved area in the Pine Barrens. And this is an actual area that probably saw a forest fire about 20 to 25 years ago, and consists of Pine Barrens heath and Pine Barrens heather, along with lichen growing on the forest floor. For its part, it's actually a very healthy ecosystem. It's Pine Barrens forest, and this is what a Pine Barrens forest does when it's regenerating back from a forest fire. Choice B is another area not too far away from choice A that just happens to have a lot more blueberries and huckleberries and heath growing in the understory. Again, this is not necessarily an unhealthy ecosystem because it is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. The forest is growing, there's light getting down to the forest floor, and the understory is growing in. I would be concerned if that understory was getting a little bit too high, because it is a fire dependent system, and we would have what are called ladder fuels getting to the treetops, and that would be an issue if you had a forest fire. Choice C, again, this is a spruce pine plantation on a managed forest in upstate New York. This is actually at the Heiberg Forest. It's a part of the ESF campus, part of their 25,000 acres of managed forest. This is an outdoor classroom south of Syracuse. And it's basically, it was farm fields many, many generations ago, and it was basically planted over with spruce, Norway spruce, which is a non-native species. And basically what's happening right now is you got sunlight hitting the floor, but the ferns are filling in. And with the ferns filling in, there's no opportunity for regeneration of any other species of trees. And that becomes an issue. Of course, it's not necessarily unhealthy. It's just not doing what the ecosystem would want it to do. Choice D is glaringly obvious. That is also a spruce plantation at Heiberg Forest. This just happens to be an area that the forest is growing so dense that sunlight is not getting to the floor, so nothing basically is able to grow. This is basically what's known as a monoculture, because the only thing that's growing here is the spruce trees. So that's a little bit about, people's perceptions on the forest and whether or not they're healthy. Now, looking at each one of these from the forest owner's perception, these are all healthy forests because they're doing what the forest owner wants them to do. And that's part of the perception. So when we're talking about understanding forest health has been defined. This is a definition by the U.S. Forest Service. It's defined by the production of forest conditions which directly satisfy human needs, and by the resilience, recurrence, persistence, and biophysical processes which lead to sustainable ecological conditions. Basically, in a nutshell, we're talking about a healthy forest sustainably meets the needs of the woodland owner and the ecosystem. So that's important to note, because it's up to the forest owner to decide which way they want the forest to go and whether or not it's serving anything to the ecosystem that forest lies in. So with regard to that, we're talking about the use and derivative of products that are renewable. And when we're talking about satisfying human needs, but that's not necessarily forest products in itself. It could also be for other purposes as well. Give me 1 second. I gotta hold on 1 second. I apologize about that.
Those buttons can get sensitive sometimes, you know?
Yeah, that's what
Crazy.
that's what I was worried about.
Yeah. You're good. That was the sneak peek, right? That's
Yeah,
all.
that's right. So when we're talking about understanding forest health, a managed forest, basically any managed forest should be healthy, but it's up to the forester to go out and to take measurements in the forest and to make a prescription for the forest owner to follow. If that forest owner is not following the prescription, then of course they could wind up driving the forest in a direction that the forest manager did not intend it to go in. So it's really up to the owner of the forest to follow the direction of the manager to be able to get the outcome that they're looking for. So that's what we mean when they should be healthy forests, but they can be healthy forest. Forest management is not synonymous to logging. The different types of harvest addressed forest issues are sometimes necessary to allow the issues that need to be addressed to be taken care of. And those could be anything like harvest for thinning to allow more sunlight to reach the forest floor, seed trees so that way you get a healthy regeneration of the next forest, select harvest, and also it may be necessary to clear cut a forest. The reasoning we'll address a little bit later. It'll become quite obvious with some of the examples that we have to show. So management, basically, we're talking about, what we mean is that a forest is monitored and measured. Management doesn't necessarily mean that the forester is going to go out and have all the trees cut. It's up to the forest owner to determine what they want to manage the forest for, and it's up to the manager to basically take the forest in that direction. So the forest manager can basically suggest appropriate prescriptions for the landowner to achieve the forest the landowner desires, but the landowner in the end, it's up to them as to whether or not they make good or bad decisions on the forest based upon the information that they're given. And the bottom line here is that healthy forests are in everyone's best interest. There's several different reasons to have healthy forests in our neighborhoods, and they go beyond the human needs, but also those for wildlife as well. And basically the needs of the ecosystem itself. So why should we be concerned about forest health? Especially now with the stress on the forest from climate change, resilience, and sustainability become extremely important. But also the issues of persistence, one of legacy, basically being able to hand the forest down to the next generation and have a healthy forest that our ancestors or predecessors can appreciate, and they'll be able to have a forest just as nice as we had. We have habitat and regeneration. Regeneration is a critical factor because during the course of time, of course, trees grow old and die, and you want to be able to make sure that the forest is still regenerating with the right type of species involved. And of course, then we have habitat. With regard to weather and climate, I bet you didn't know, but forest actually, in the process of transpiring, they draw water up from the ground and basically release it in their leaves and needles. In effect, what they actually do is they create humidity and allows, in some areas, thunderstorms to actually develop as a result of transpiration of the forest. And of course, environmental conditions, which are really important because forests are actually responsible for taking in excess water and also cleansing water in riparian situations. So when we want to talk about defining the forest, we need to know the components of the forest. So the forest is more than just the trees, but it also consists of the air that blows through the trees, the climate and the weather, as we discussed before, that the forest actually can have a hand in helping to create and alter. Then we have the trees and the shrubs in the forest itself. The understory, which is basically the shrubs and everything that's grow underneath the tree, and also mosses and lichens and the like. The soil, which is critically important to the forest because the soil we'll discuss in a second. And then, of course, the water that basically passes through the system. Water is basically dynamic and it's ever passing through the system in the form of through fall, in the form of rain, dew, ice and snow. Eventually makes its way into the ground and comes up through the roots and once again transpires into the atmosphere and starts all over again. But the important thing here is with regard to the soil. The soil is actually a biogeographic membrane, biogeochemical membrane, and the structure of the soil is very important. When you start messing with the structure of the soil, you basically can take the forest in a whole new different direction. And there's a bunch of microbes and nutrients that exist in the soil. It's very critical to try to maintain the soil health with regard to the forest. So again, it's not just the trees that make up the forest. So a healthy forest sustainably meets the needs of the woodland owner and the ecosystem. I have here two different pictures. The photo on the left is a picture of a pine plantation down in Maryland that is basically managed for timber. Believe it or not, this stand was harvested and clear cut about 7 or 8 years ago. And you can see that the trees are in the forest and growing healthy. The brown stuff in the understory are basically trees that were cut down as a result of a pre-commercial thinning operation. The reason that this was done is to allow the dominant trees to be able to get more nutrients and grow up taller in the forest. This is basically a normal practice that is taken care of in pine plantation forest down here. This forest will continue to grow for another 40 to 55 years before it gets harvested again and we start the whole cycle all over again. But again, this forest is only about it's probably no older than 8 years old. It's probably about 7 years old. The forest on the right is actually not too far away from the forest on the left. This is also on another property that property owner manages for timber. This is another forest. It's a hardwood forest. Basically, this forest here is anywhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 100 years old. It's basically a buffer for what used to be a bald eagle nest that was growing in the area. The property owner actually retains this particular portion of the forest to enjoy its aesthetic appeal. You can see there's basically no understory growing underneath in the bottom. We'll go over that in a little bit when we cover wildlife. But again, this forest here is part of a bigger, the property is in the neighborhood of 400 acres, and the rest of the forest is actually pine plantation. So he's basically managing for several different purposes to get timber, but also for wildlife considerations. But both of these are examples of healthy forest. Now, an unhealthy forest does not sustainably meet the needs of the woodland owner and the ecosystem. Here we have an example of a forest that was clear cut. It was a 4-acre clear cut. And basically the landowner was taking advantage of the oaks that were on the property to harvest them for timber. As we zoom in and take a closer look, believe it or not, this, see if I can go back. Can you see my cursor?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This slash pile in the back is not much of the issue, although, you know, there's some debate as to whether or not that much slash should have been left on the property because it kind of inhibits regeneration. But here we have one of the stumps. This is to be expected with any clear cut operation, obviously. But what you really want to look at is if we go in a little bit closer, the only regeneration that we have on this property is hollies that are coming up. That's what you see here. There's basically no regeneration of the trees that were harvested, and that in itself is a problem and makes for a forest that's not going to complement the ecosystem when it comes back. It's going to be an inferior forest when it actually returns. Here we have another picture. This was a maple tree that was cut. This growth here is what's known as coppice, and basically the tree is growing back from the living roots underneath. And in effect, what winds up happening is that's fine, except the only thing is with regard to if this landowner wants to manage for hardwoods in the future, and if they want to manage for oaks, basically they're not going to get that kind of regeneration. They're only going to get maples on the property. So that's really not going to do them any good. Now that slash pile that you saw earlier was actually, there was some regeneration going on in there, but once again, it was only maples that were regenerating. And again, part of the problem is, you know, it's good, there'll be trees there. It's just, will they be the right trees? And that's part of the issue. So this particular example is not a very healthy situation for the ecosystem. We have another example here, and the question I'll throw out rhetorically is whether or not this is a healthy example of a forest. We have a lot of understory growth. We have pine trees growing. It looks nice and green and healthy. And yes, in fact, this is an example of a healthy forest. In this particular case, the landowner is managing once again for timber. These are loblolly pine, and I would say that they will probably be harvested sometime in the next 10 to 15 years. Now, most of that understory that you see is actually native growth. I know from personally walking through it, it is filled with greenbriers, blackberries, and sweet pepperbush. But it's got a lot of nice nooks and crannies for the wildlife to grow in and escape, and has a nice habitat. And I believe this is actually a forest for interior dwelling birds also. So there's habitat for the birds to live in as well. So this forest is meeting the landowner and ecosystem needs. Here we have another picture. And I'm kind of giving this one away with the an unhealthy forest does not sustainably meet the needs of the woodland owner and the ecosystem. You know, it looks green, you got growth, you got everything happening, but in fact, is this healthy or unhealthy? And this is unhealthy. And the reason being that this particular example, what you see growing here is wisteria, Chinese wisteria. This forest is not meeting the ecosystem needs. In effect, if you look into the background back here, where's my cursor? Right up in here. This is wisteria that's actually growing into the trees. And where you see it in the foreground, basically the wisteria is at waist height, actually waist to chest height. And it is growing so thick that absolutely nothing else can grow. In the background, I thought I had a picture of it, but there's actually a tree, about a 45-year-old loblolly pine tree in the background that is being strangled by wisteria, which is wrapping around it. And what'll happen is that tree will be girdled, the tree will die, and the wisteria will once again take over that entire area. In this particular case, we recommended to the forest landowner that they should clear cut all of this and basically start it over again. And basically, there is no other choice because wisteria just basically grows on its own and has nothing else to do but grow. There's no competition and there's nothing else to slow it down. So in this particular case, we would clear cut it. And when we do, we'd have to come back and do spot treatments as the wisteria is now back down to the ground. It would be spot treated so that way it could be managed accordingly. You could also come back with a dense planting of trees such as loblolly that would overshadow the area so that way this wouldn't happen again. But in the meantime, the landowner is going to have to stay on top of it and spot treat accordingly so that the wisteria once again stays in check until it stops growing. So the U.S. Forest Service, they do what is known as an FIA or a forest inventory and analysis system. They basically inventory all the forest across the United States on a set interval. One of the things they look for, of course, is forest health. And actually, this is increasing. They didn't always look for forest health issues, but it is something that they look for more commonly now. And of course, these are the items that they are looking at. And this is actually a characteristics that can vary and change. So in other words, if you look to where the asterisk is and you see where it says lichen communities, they don't actually look for lichen communities in all forests now. It's more of a regional indicator, and it has been retitled as a national core indicator. They will change the characteristics of what they're looking for periodically based on research and scientific methods. And you see soil quality is amongst the issues that they look for. Now, these health indicators are only sampled on anywhere from a low of 7% to a high of 25% of the plots that the FIA plots are actually generated on. Now, this will also depend on budget constraints, the client needs, and also regional issues. So if they happen to know that there's something going on in a certain area that they need to watch and be more intensive with, then of course they'll increase the amount of observations that are made. Now, the lichen on the right is actually a good indicator of healthy air. lichen will not grow in areas that are with heavy pollution. So when you see a dense, heavy cover of lichen, as you see in this photo, then you know you have good air quality. So that's one of the reasons that they look for lichen when they're doing these type of surveys. So basically, we've covered the whole section on understanding the requirements on what makes a healthy forest. And of course, again, it all depends on the ecosystem services and what the forest owner is looking for. So we're going to touch a little bit now on threats to forest health. Now, with regard to native detriments to the forest, it's important to know that these species that feast on trees and eat trees that are native to our area are basically co-evolving with the species that they affect. That's very important because basically what happens is as they evolve and they affect the trees can respond accordingly. And that way they can keep the species affecting them in check. Like the upper right-hand corner is a metallic borer, and it basically affects maple trees. But in itself, it's not a threat to the forest because the maple trees are able to act accordingly so that way they know it won't get out of hand. Tar spot underneath. Norway spruce got hit really bad up in New York a couple years ago. Basically, it was thought that this had to do with weather conditions. But there was some research that was done by Cornell a while back suggesting that there was something else that was going on. But unfortunately, since it's cyclical, it has a tendency to come and go. But tar spot in and of itself, affecting native trees in our forest is not an issue. It's relatively benign. It's not basically affecting enough of the taking away enough of the chlorophyll for photosynthesis to the leaves to actually be able to affect it. So even though this looks pretty bad, you can see it's isolated basically. If you look around at the and this is a red maple, if you look around at the other leaves behind it, it's really not too bad. It's not affecting it all that much. Just this one particular leaf. So again, it's basically a factor of how much it's actually impacting. And that's going to be really important to understand as we get into invasive species. Again, the whole idea is that these things usually co-evolve with the species that they affect. And in effect, because of that, their numbers are low and they have little effect on forest health, but there can be exceptions. And one of those exceptions is at the bottom of the screen. We're talking about southern pine beetle. Southern pine beetle actually erupts at times and actually can impact dramatically forest health. Again, I'll just go over some things that we commonly see in the forest that are, I don't want to say benign in itself, but have very little impact overall on forest health. This is armillaria. This is black shoestring fungus. And if we go to the next screen, you can see up and close, this right here is actually the fungus itself. It looks just like black shoestring. It grows underneath the bark. It starts out as a root rot and basically climbs up the tree and grows underneath the bark and kills the tree. Then the tree falls down in the forest and then the fungus eats the tree. It actually happens to be one of my favorite fungus, actually my favorite fungus, because when I first learned about it, I know it's surreal, but it's really a unusual to see something that starts out as a little tiny microscopic spore that can actually go in and kill a tree and then eat the tree. There's just something surreally, strangely interesting about that. But Armoralia is just another species of fungus that's it's common in the forest, and it's just a part of the ecosystem. And we have two other species, Sparasis, and this is called cauliflower fungus on the left. I actually found this fungus when doing surveys over the summer in a loblolly pine forest. Sparasis is an interesting fungus because what it does is it causes root rot on trees. But it's not thought to affect the tree health because it takes a long time for it to actually cause any damage to the trees. It's important to note, though, because it's a good indicator of determining whether or not the forest is under stress. And that's one of the reasons why I put the picture of this one here, because we saw it all over the place on the forest floor, which was a good indicator that the forest itself was under stress. As it is right now, that particular forest is going through a thinning, so that way we can relieve some of the stress on the trees, so that way they can grow stronger and healthier. On the right is Laria. It's also known as dead man's fingers. The reason that it's called that is because it looks like somebody who has passed away is sticking up their fingers up out of the forest floor and trying to grab you. There's a cross section of what these things look like, and the little tiny dots around the outside of it along the perimeter are what actually release the spores. And this photo on the lower right is actually a picture from a microscope. It's not a cartoon. It's actually a picture of the spores themselves underneath the microscope. And if you look, let me see if I can get my cursor right here. I think that's a springtail that is either feasting on the fungus on the outside of it or just sunning itself. I'm not quite sure, but it photobombed the picture I took it when I took it. Another threat to forest health. Again, these are all native things that you will find in our forest. This is periodic cicada. This is actually a picture of brood X. And this picture was taken along the rest stop on I-78. What's the name of the township up there? Andy, do you know the name of the township out that way?
John, where were you? Like what part of 78?
Right before the bridge, before going into Pennsylvania.
Okay, so like Stewartsville, Bloomsbury, somewhere up there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, there's a basically it's going westbound, and the rest stop is on the north side of the highway. It's the last rest stop before you get to the Pennsylvania state line.
I think that's the Bloomsbury one. Yeah, I go by there. Yep. So yeah, that area got hit by the cicada pretty bad.
Yep. And one of the things I wanted to point out, so these are actually the exoskeletons of the cicada that were left on the tree. They basically, molted and went away to feast on more trees. They actually cause damage to the ends of the branches that basically kill the branches. But again, not enough to actually kill the tree. But one of our concerns when I was working with New York DEC and Forest Health was whether or not that actually would allow it to become a vector for oak wilt. Because as people may know and may have heard, oak wilt basically comes in after damage by a beetle known as Nitidui. And when the beetle comes in with the damage, it actually carries the fungus along with it. And basically, next thing you know, the trees die. So the question was posed as to whether or not the damage from the cicadas could actually lead to oak wilt being transferred to the trees. I guess that's something that we'll have to wait and see whether or not there's an uptick and increase from when this cicada outbreak occurred in oak wilt in the area. I haven't heard anything with regard to that from the state of New Jersey, so it's just a theory. This is wood sower gall wasp. And basically just illustrate it as to let you know that there's things out there that you'll see on your trees that basically are benign and don't have any effect, even though we don't understand from a general perspective what's going on. But again, this is basically the wasp releases its larvae and it's basically underneath all that cottony web and feasting on the tree and growing and getting larger, and it'll basically fly off and do this thing all over again for another generation. But again, this is relatively benign, and this is something you may see in the forest, but it doesn't necessarily affect the long-term health of the forest or the trees. This is oak skeletonizer. This is basically the larvae of a moth that basically goes in and it does nothing but eat the chlorophyll off of the leaves of the tree and leaves the other layer of the leaf. And that's why you're able to see through it, translucent. Again, not necessarily a long-term issue unless, of course, they eat too many of the leaves on a particular tree. I like this picture only because there seemed to be an inordinate number of leaves that were affected. This is probably the second generation, maybe even a third, but I wouldn't go swearing to that, only because they generally only produce two generations a year. So this is probably the second generation. Although it does seem like there's a lot more damage than one would expect to see. And of course, what winds up happening and the way this affects the forest health is it cuts off the, excuse me, the photosynthesis from being created in the leaves so that way the leaves aren't producing the sugar and basically can affect the health of that particular tree. Circle back around now to southern pine beetle. The reason I wanted to do that is because this is kind of an exception to the rule with regard to native species affecting our native forest. Basically, anything brown that you see in this photo in the background are pine trees that have been killed by southern pine beetle. The inset photo on the right-hand side is basically excuse me one second, is a pitch tube. The tree tries to defend itself from the beetle actually entering the tree and will put out massive amounts of pitch to be able to stop it. And that's what you see in the background. That circle in the middle is where the beetle was actually able to either get in or get out. So basically the defenses on this particular tree did not work. This is actually from a dead tree. And of course you see the picture of the beetle itself, the upper right. The only way to effectively deal with southern pine beetle outbreak is to cut the trees down. This unnerving picture is from our own Wharton State Forest. This was back, I believe 2016 was when I took the picture. I think this was an outbreak of beetle, 2015 possibly. And what has to be done is the trees need to be cut down. And when the trees are cut down, they're left in place. And they basically buck the trees, meaning they cut them up into smaller pieces and they leave them scattered so that way when the beetles emerge, they get disoriented and they can't fly to new trees, and it basically stops the spread. But this is essential. I mean, this is the only way to stop bark beetle outbreaks in the pine barren forest. Otherwise, the beetles will just keep right on rolling. Now, the interesting thing is bark beetle outbreaks start with a tree that's under stress. The female beetle will actually go to a tree that's stressed. And when it gets there, it sends out pheromones, which basically tells all the other beetles, hey, guess what? We got a tree that's under stress. And they all come flying in, and they basically have a feast, and they send out another pheromone, which stops the activity. And when this happens, they say, okay, it's time to move on to another tree. And they fly off to another tree and do this all over again. And they will just keep doing it unimpeded until there's no more pine trees left. They are very, very destructive insects. And like I said, they have found that the best way to manage for it is to, number one, make sure that the trees are not growing too close in to each other so that they're stressing themselves out. That's very important, because a stressed out forest can lead to these type of events. And number two, they have found that by managing this accordingly, these beetles, they come in waves and outbreaks. So every 15 to 20 years, you'll see an uptick in southern pine beetle activity. There's no known reason why for this uptick in activity. It could be weather related. It could be the fact that there could be a cyclical item that's relating to the stress of trees, which leads to the increased activity. Scientists don't really know. But here's another picture in that same general vicinity in 2019, and you can see in the background here, the trees are actually starting to grow back in and fill back into the forest. So unfortunately, you know, it's a bit unnerving for the forest to have to be cut that way, but it is an effective approach to be able to address the problem, and the forest does quickly recover. So we basically covered native species which impact the forest. And again, as you noticed, except for southern pine beetle, there's not too many species that are native, except for spruce budworm up north of us in the boreal forest, that really have a dramatic impact on forest health. So they live and they coexist with the forest itself. Invasive species are a whole other story. Invasive species and plants basically have no natural predators. They're generalist, and they will affect many species at times, not all, some of them. The native plants themselves have no natural defense, and the non-native plants can outcompete the native species. What basically happens is, especially in the springtime, when it comes to the plants starting in the forest, the first ones to green up will be the invasive species. So basically, they're getting their legs on the ground and up and running before our native species actually start to leaf out. And by the way, at the end of the season, they're also the last ones to drop their leaves. If anybody else was in the forest and you saw a bunch of Norway spruce will be, I'm sorry, Norway maple. I'm so sorry about that. Norway maple will actually drop its leaves after our native species of deciduous trees. And as a result, they're still growing. So they're able to outcompete the native species. And why is that a problem? Again, we circle back around to the wisteria. This is Chinese wisteria. The reason you can tell the difference between Chinese wisteria and Japanese wisteria is the way it wraps itself around the tree. Chinese wisteria goes left to right, that is in a counterclockwise direction. Japanese wisteria goes in the other direction, but both of them are invasive, as you can see, having a dramatic impact on the forest. We had an earlier discussion also down south, kudzu. Lori was indicating down outside of Baltimore that some of the forests are affected by that. Kudzu down south is another vine, which is invasive, which basically writes its own rules and is able to dominate the forest. And as you can see, with dramatic results. This is another one that I'm sure everybody have seen and is familiar with, but you may not know the problem. This is Phragmites, or the common reed. Phragmites, in particular, in this particular forest, is killing the loblolly pine trees, and that's what you see. The trees in the background that are dead are loblolly pine trees that have succumbed to the Phragmites. Phragmites, basically what it does is it's able to produce gallic acid, which basically is a phytotoxin, and it degrades to another type of acid called mesoselic acid. And that basically, the 1-2 punch, it kills the plants that are around it and allows only the Phragmites to persist. Phragmites will grow to be 10 to 12 feet tall, and it basically shadows out the ground. So basically nothing else can grow. The sunlight doesn't get down to the forest floor, and it just dominates the area. So it is very good. It spreads by seed, it spreads by rhizomes. That is roots that basically crawl along the ground and is able to pop up everywhere. You can cut it down, and the cut pieces of the Phragmites is another way that the reed is able to reproduce. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the top invasive species that are just absolutely horrible. We talk about invasive insects now. And we were seeing the invasive, the native insects earlier, and they have a small impact on the forest. What you see here are ash trees in New York State. That's an ash forest that has completely died as a result of emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer, of course, is a non-native invasive beetle that basically came in to the United States and basically is wiping out ash trees, except for selectively working with individual trees themselves in the forest. There's really not much that can be done with them. You may be able to see as we zoom in a little bit closer, the forest landowner was attempting to harvest what he could out of the ash trees. Unfortunately, ash trees become very brittle after they die, and they're very difficult to cut down. Effectively, what winds up happening is when you go to try to cut it down, it will basically drop on the ground and then it explodes on impact because it's so brittle. They are trying some biological means of addressing emerald ash borer by releasing predators that basically go after the larvae in the tree. And there's also been some activity by woodpeckers. Here you see an exit hole from a beetle. And the reason it's very distinctive because it has that D shape. It looks like a D on its side. The ash borer has a flat head, and that's why this has a flat head going across the top when it exits out, is because that's basically the shape of the beetle. But you can see that there's been woodpecker activity on this tree. When you see it, it's basically called blonding. Here we have another one that we're all too familiar with. This is spongy moth, which is used to be known as gypsy moth. All the trees that you see in the foreground in this pine forest are actually deciduous trees that have been defoliated by gypsy moth. I'm sorry, spongy moth. Again, non-native insects, you can see the dramatic effect and the amount of trees that are killed in the forest versus our native species of predators that are parasites predators and parasites that basically go after our native trees in the forest. They have nothing basically to slow them down, and that's one of the issues with invasive species. We can try to manage the forest accordingly where we find them, and that's what we do. This is beech bark disease. This is on beech trees, and what happens is you basically have a scale. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the white stuff is the scale, which is actually a small, tiny little insect that basically makes its way onto the tree and finds itself a home and then starts sucking sap out of the tree. When it pierces the bark, it basically enables fungus to come in, and that's what's causing all of the damage on the tree because it starts feeding on the tree itself also. The red over here, this is what's known as parathecia. These are actually from the fungus itself, which is producing spores to reproduce and carry itself away so that the process can be done all over again. Beech bark disease in conjunction with a new disease, which we hope to be covering later on this year. Beech leaf disease is doing a 1-2 punch on the beech forest in hardwood forest in the Northeast. Unfortunately, the prognosis at this point in time is not too good. One of the things that's happening with beech bark disease is the fact that it stunts the growth of the tree grows down, and then you have a resprouting of the forest with little tiny shoots off of the existing roots, and basically these crowd out the forest floor from anything else growing. It's not a very good situation. So these are invasive microbes. Another example, of course, is the chestnut blight, which you see in the upper right-hand corner. We're trying to get a blight-resistant chestnut that has been modified. They don't say it's genetically modified, but basically they introduced a gene from wheat, which enables the tree to produce compounds which basically help it to fight off the blight. And hopefully, with any kind of luck, since we introduced these blights across the forest, we'll be able to reintroduce blight-resistant chestnut in the foreseeable future. Those basically cover the insect effects and other microbes and everything that affect the forest. And we're going to go on to some other effects. Namely, here we talk about wildfires. Wildfires in New Jersey, they see about 1,500 wildfires annually. On average, 7,000 acres are damaged or destroyed. Most wildfires are caused by humans. There is occasion when a lightning bolt will start a wildfire, but by far the most, over 90% of fires are actually caused by humans. Of course, the New Jersey Pine Barrens are a fire-dependent ecosystem. So in that particular case, fire can benefit the forest as well as destroy it. Not just the New Jersey Pine Barrens, but any oak hickory forest can actually be looked at as fire dependent. It can actually rely on regeneration. So fire doesn't always necessarily have to be a bad thing, but out of control wildfires are most definitely a bad thing. And we'll go over that in a second. This is, you see on the bottom of the screen, that website right there. Anybody can go online and find out what the current fire danger is at that website right down there. That is the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, and I clipped this right from their website back on the 16th. give you an idea of what the current fire danger is. Now, they break New Jersey up into 3 different state areas. So you have area A up north, area B in the central area, and area C in the south. And at this particular point in time, all 3 areas were low fire danger. It's good to know when you're looking at your forest whether or not what the fire danger is during that time of the season, especially during dry spells or droughts, so that you can plan accordingly and keep your eyes open for fire risk. You can see the smoldering here in the background. This is actually a wildfire that affected an acre of land off the Chesapeake Bay. This forest fire was accidentally set, and it smoldered in the ground for more than 2 weeks. What happened is that it was an unmanaged area of forest that was affected. Despite all of the litter that you're seeing on the ground here right now, this is all stuff that subsequently fell out of the trees since the fire. There was about 1 foot of leaf litter that was all over the ground down here, and that's what helped the fire to persist. And basically what was happening is it was getting into the subsurface and actually burning the roots of some of these trees. How this affects forest health is down the road. The trees themselves, they're going to have a weakened root system, and when a windstorm comes along, it'll knock the trees down. I actually saw one of the trees that was affected dramatically. It was starting to lean as we were working on the fire. And, I had a concern that at some point in time, it was a rather mature tree and the tree was probably going to drop down. So those are different things that ways that wildfire can affect the forest health. But another way wildfires can affect forest health is by changing the composition of the forest. This is a picture of a wildfire that occurred in Atzine. I think it was probably in the mid-2015 area, right around then. Since that time, what is happening is the pine trees, of course, were able to survive and are still living in this area. But also you notice that in the understory, oak trees are just absolutely taking off. They're about 3 to 4 feet high, and they will continue to grow. And at some point in time, they will probably top the pitch pines in the forest and will actually shadow them out and dominate the forest once again. So again, this is another way that wildfires actually will change forest health and the composition of the forest. So we look at different things that with regard to threats to forest health, we're looking at the weather and drought, flood, wind, storms, hurricanes, ice, snow, and lightning. These things all contribute to the forest health as well. This is the source of this is on the bottom in the middle of the screen. This is the National Drought Monitor, and you can actually zoom in on the Northeast. Again, this is current information. It was valid as of January 10th. You can see the yellow area is abnormally dry in the upper portion of the state and all the way down in Cape May, which I find surprising. Now, we did get some recent rains in the area, so that, of course, can change. And they'll update the drought monitor accordingly. But again, when you want to pay attention to forest health issues, paying attention to the drought monitor can be very important. One of the reasons, of course, that drought is able to affect the trees is because the trees stop transpiring. And when that happens, the stomata that are on the leaves that allow the leaves to transpire and breathe, they close up. So the trees can't take in carbon dioxide. And of course, the process of photosynthesis itself actually involves water. So without the water, the trees cannot photosynthesize. So basically, production stops and the tree goes dormant. If the tree exists in this condition long enough, of course, it'll dry up and drop its leaves and go into a longer state of dormancy, almost as if it was winter. If this persists enough time, then of course it's going to kill the trees. And once again, this is how it affects forest health. But flood, getting too much water into the forest, can also affect the trees. What happens is, you can see down here in the upper or the lower right-hand corner, with regard to soil, basically has pore space in it. And what happens is there's air in there, but there's also different amounts of water. And of course, once it gets, all these air spaces are filled up, it becomes saturated and there's no room for air. Then the roots can't breathe. And then of course it affects the trees. Basically, they can suffocate at the roots. Wind, of course, is another factor. Wind plays a role in many different ways. If the wind is strong enough, it'll just knock trees right down, but it'll also take advantage of different stressors to the forest that have already weakened the trees, like the fungus that we were talking before that eats the roots, and the insects that basically weaken the trees as well. Here we have another example. This is our own Double Trouble State Forest. This was back in 2015. They had recently harvested for Atlantic white cedar on the property. Reason being, this area was devastated during Hurricane Sandy. And what happened was, with regard to Atlantic white cedar, the cedar trees can't remain on their own when they're isolated in individual stands. So individual clumps, that is. They have to grow in groups, just like you see them growing in the back here. This is a nice, strong, healthy stand of Atlantic white cedar growing in the background. But the trees that were affected here and harvested had to be harvested to allow more Atlantic white cedar to grow back in. And of course, that'll happen from these seed trees that are in the background. And basically, the seeds just basically blow in, and this whole area will just repopulate once again. As a note, I will have to make a trip back out there and update and see exactly where this area stands as far as its growth, but I'm sure it's filling back in with Atlantic white cedar. And let's not leave out ice and snow. Ice and snow can be very devastating to a forest. This was actually from last week. This was a storm out in Minnesota. And what had happened is the snow was so wet and heavy, which is unprecedented in that area. They're not used to seeing wet, heavy snow. It's usually a light, dry snow because of the cold temperatures. Basically, it weighed down aspen trees. When the aspen trees bent over like this, basically what winds up happening is they'll get stuck that way, and basically they'll be useless for harvesting as trees when they get mature. So it's going to have a long-term devastating effect on the industry out there that relies on them growing these type of trees in the forest. So that's another way that the ice and snow can have an impact. Another way that ice itself can have an impact is it weighs down the branches, and the branches can break in the wind. And as a result, basically, it's just very difficult for the trees to recover. Lightning, of course, is another issue. This is a tree that was struck. And as you can see, the lightning bolt spirals down as it comes down the tree. It blew off the bark. We were talking about southern pine beetle earlier. Southern pine beetle basically love any loblolly pine trees that are struck by lightning, because now this tree is weakened. This is not a loblolly pine tree, by the way, but loblolly pine trees that are struck by lightning basically are weakened, and as a result, the females beetles can go in and have themselves a feast, and basically it starts that whole cycle again with the southern pine beetles. That's one of the things that they look for, is any trees that are struck by lightning. Keep an eye on that to see if there's any bark beetle activity, so that way they can get to it rather quickly. And of course, lightning can also cause forest fires. Climate change is another issue that affects our forest. This is a picture of a ghost forest on the Chesapeake Bay. These are loblolly pine trees that basically have succumbed to the water level rising as a result of the sea level rise, as a result of climate change. But climate change also affects species in other ways. It basically drives species that grow in the north to drive further north, grow further north, but it also changes the elevation which these trees are comfortable at growing at as well. So you'll see more species basically migrating to the north if they can. Of course, what it stresses the trees that are already growing there. Sugar maple comes to mind. Sugar maple does not like hot conditions, so you'll find them growing up in New York and up in North Jersey, but in South Jersey, they're absent. That's because the trees, the climate is not right for them. And effectively, up in the north, as the warmer temperatures encroach in that area, it's stressing those trees out, and again, changing the composition of the forest, changing the forest health. Wildlife damage, of course, we have a browse line here from deer. Yeah, those stinking buggers. I'm just kidding. But yeah, basically deer can be very devastating to a forest, but other types of wildlife can affect the forest also. Quickly, we'll go over human causes of threats to forest health. And of course, you know, the obvious ones being, of course, pollution, overuse. People may not think too much about that, but when we have a state park or forest that's used for recreational activities, if we have too much use on the trails, too much litter, it can be abused and overused. It winds up stressing the forest out and wreaking havoc to forest health. Mismanagement comes to mind. We have short harvest turnover. The trees aren't able to recover fast enough. The landowner just is interested in trying to reap as much of a profit as they can out of the forest for harvest purposes. That is not good. It's not healthy for the forest. And once again, lack of prescription applications. If the landowner decides not to follow the forester's recommendations, and this can lead to exploitation and degradation of the forest. I borrowed this diagram from Ralph Nyland's Silviculture Concepts and Applications. Basically, up here in the upper left-hand corner, you're looking at a forest that's pristine. As we increase the amount of use and exploitation along the bottom scale here, you have to throw more resources at the forest to be able to keep it in a healthy condition. And of course, as the amount of resources decline, what happens is it's getting lower and lower on the scale, leading to an exploited forest. When intervention ceases, in other words, say the forest landowner decides that all they're going to do is harvest their trees and they're not going to listen to the forester anymore, the forest becomes exploited. And when uncontrolled exploitation begins, the forest starts to downslide into a degraded forest. See, the forest has to be able to recover from any stresses, not only those that are man-made like timber harvests, but also natural conditions such as wind events, weather events, outbreaks from pests. It's important to have a resilient forest. This area up here basically is representative of a resilient forest. Here we have an example of a clear cut that was taken care of. I believe this was a mixed hardwood area. The landowner is intending on burning the slash piles that are left so that basically they can get a clean start. They're going to go in, they're going to replant the tree with replant the ground with hardwoods and pine, and they'll likely get some regeneration as well. This is basically a post-harvest clear cut at about 5 years. They recently thinned for pre-commercial thinning, basically to allow the dominant trees to be able to grow bigger and stronger. This forest owner actually owns the land for timber, but there are likely to be regeneration in the forest by natural means as well. This is a state forest, not in New Jersey, that is also managed for timber harvest on occasion. This area, once again, was harvested about 5 years ago. It's healthy, it's filling in, lots of native regeneration. It's great wildlife cover, and this forest is actually used for multiple purposes. So you can see the recreation trail right up through the center. But there's also hunting on it. And once again, they also sell the timber on the property as well, so that way they can maintain the forest. And there's varying strata of the forest cover to allow for the wildlife to basically grow in and eat at different levels. We saw this picture earlier. This is a post-harvest of an exploited forest. The slash piles, of course, will return naturally into the forest at some point in time, but there's no natural regeneration of favorable species. The unfavorable species are basically coming in. Whether or not that'll be good for wildlife is up in the air, but the bottom line here is you have basically a forest of a lesser quality that'll return to the area. If nothing else is done, if no additional planning is taking place, this forest is basically going to suffer and is not going to be productive for the ecosystem or for human needs. And this is a post-exploited degraded forest. Basically, you can see it's filled and choked with invasive species. The tree health could be questionable itself. Whether or not it has any value to the ecosystem as far as wildlife is concerned is questionable. The very fact that you have non-native species in there that are dominating the forest would serve to mean that, the wildlife that's there has nothing to eat. So, and wrapping this up, basically the idea of protecting forest health is to follow state, federal, and cooperative extension guidelines and advice, use a consulting forester, keep invasive species in check, don't move firewood because that's how our invasive insects get around, thin and harvest as recommended, when recommended, use prescribed fire where applicable, plant trees, and plant the right trees. That's very important. And of course, try to manage the deer population. And here we have an example of a prescribed fire burning in a Wharton State Forest. Once again, prescribed fire, of course, is very healthy for the forest health, especially in fire-dependent ecosystems. Wrapping up, my recommendations to you, if you're interested in having a healthy forest, is to become a New Jersey Woodland Steward and attend our program that we run every September. Of course, there's another program online for forest enthusiasts that own smaller acreage. The Woods in Your Backyard. It's run by many cooperative extension agencies adjacent to New Jersey. You can attend one online through Penn State or the University of Maryland, where I had attended and took that one. It's a very worthwhile and rewarding course, and it's actually endorsed by Doug Ptolemy. And of course, we have additional resources here. If you're not a member, become a member of the New Jersey Forestry Association. We have the New Jersey Forest Service and their website, where you can get a list of consulting foresters to help you out with your forest. And New Jersey Forest Fire Service, Rutgers Cooperative Extension, and Penn State Cooperative Extension, with a whole bunch of resources online to help you with trees and managing your forest. Okay, and I expect at this point in time, if you have any questions, I'll pop up here to, let's see, the Q&A.
Yep. And John, before I answered a couple of, we were chatting in Q&A since chat is disabled. So I responded to one of the first questions, and I had this same question too, before you get into the ones that are open. Why did they take lichen off of the list for inventory? That was way at the beginning.
That is a good question. Hold on one second. Oh, stop sharing. Hold on.
Yep.
I'll get back. If I go back to that, we'll get
Yeah,
that.
you can go back.
Yeah. I just want to look at something real quick, because it just so happens I left that page. I left that page up, but unfortunately my computer's not cooperating with me. Why don't we go on to the next one, Lori, while we're waiting?
Sure thing. So we were talking about some of the beetles. I think Kenneth was asking when we were talking about the southern pine beetle in particular. And Kenneth, if that's incorrect, let me know. But would a burn control the beetle? How could any of the burns help? Or even EAB for that matter? I'm sure that's a question.
The way that they, with regard to ash forest and hardwood forest, I think the burn will kill the tree before it actually does anything for the beetle. With regard to southern pine beetle, once again, they have co-evolved with each other, so I don't expect that it would have a dramatic effect.
Yeah, probably not. Okay. And Kenneth, if we can ask anything or clarify that anymore, just put that in the Q&A. Okay, John, do you want to talk lichen?
Yeah, well, I couldn't find the information.
Okay.
I closed that document, unfortunately.
Oh, got it. Okay, no problem. No problem.
But it is in the FIA. If you Google FIA, Forest Health Ecosystem, and U.S. Forest Service, they have that document up and available. And it's listed in that documentation. I just don't have it at my fingertips, unfortunately. If we could get an email for that person, I could probably look into it and send them a response.
Okay, sounds good. Yep, will do. Okay. So then moving right along, when you showed a picture that had the 1 acre property that had the burn. It wasn't a prescribed burn, it was a forest fire. Yeah. And Joan wanted to know why or how was there such a deep layer of leaf litter? And I think I know the answer, because you said early on that that was not a property that was managed.
Right, it was untended, and basically that's what winds up happening is that litter gets so deep that it winds up becoming an issue itself. And depending on the species of trees that are growing there, it'll actually increase the risk of fire. In particular, I'm familiar with a property that hasn't had a forest fire in 80 years, and it has a duff layer, leaf litter layer that is approximately that deep. Again, it becomes a problem if it's untended, because when you get drought and dry conditions like we had over the summer, it does increase the risk of wildfire.
Okay. Okay,
So
great.
periodically, prescribed burns are the best way to handle a situation like that, unless you live in a wet area.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share Mary's comments here. And I can certainly understand this because I live in Hunterdon County too. So the wooded acreage behind her house has nothing but non-native invasives as undergrowth. The deer population in Hunterdon County is estimated to be 100 per square mile, if not more, right? And they have eaten any native undergrowth. How can an area like this be brought back into a healthy balance?
Well, the short answer is if you go in and aggressively address the non-native species, that'll help. And then, unfortunately, again, being the short answer to the question, deer fencing. We're still trying to learn as a society an adequate way to deal with this deer pressure. It's something that is actively being investigated, and I think it's going to take years of research to be able to come up with an adequate solution. I have found that pressure does diminish as you get out into more we'll say I don't want to say natural or native growth of forest, but areas where you have more hunting, where the hunting pressure is on, they do not have equivalent issues with regard to the deer. I know people don't necessarily like to hear that, and I know that that's an issue. Deer have just learned, hey, guess what? If we live in close with these guys in between our houses, then nobody's going to hunt us. And unfortunately it's true, and there's not much that can be done as far as that's concerned. We were talking about non-native species. There's a proliferation of non-native species also because the deer don't like to eat them, so that becomes an issue.
Yeah, they prefer the natives. Okay, I'm gonna get back to Daniel's comments because it's long, but I want to get to there's just a couple more questions. So Pat wanted to know how do they prevent soil erosion when clear cutting? Doesn't the soil just wash away?
Well, actually, what they do, I know down here, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Andy can help out with this, but I know anytime that a harvest is considered on land down here, what they do is they issue a soil erosion control permit, and it's got to be adhered to strictly. Depending on the pitch of the land, they may have to put up silt fencing along the harvest area to prevent it from washing out. But there's a lot of different management and best management practices that are followed to try to minimize these situations, so that way water quality is paramount. It is very important, and the thing is that is the first and foremost thing it's considered with any harvest. Anybody that's having issues with regard to that are not following best management practices. So if there's any issues, it's likely because they're not following the best management practices.
Okay, so that would be something that a forester.
Yeah, the foresters, when the foresters schedule a cut, depending on how whether it's going to be a seed tree cut or shelterwood cut or whatever it happens to be, they will be looking at the conditions on the land, and they will, if there's any danger of any kind of erosion like that, they won't recommend it.
Yes, exactly. Now, where I'm a forester right now, down in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, I am the flattest area you have ever seen. Basically, it is so flat that the only thing that we have in a way of topography are drainage ditches next to fields and roadways. But even so, we still have to issue or we have to have soil erosion control permits issued every time a harvest is done. And like I said, it's very important to adhere to the best management practices, because water quality is very important. Most of these best management practices a legal concern. So they're very important and have to be adhered to.
And I think also the danger of erosion primarily would be on skid trails. And I know when we do harvest on our property, the foresters that we use, when the harvest is completed, they come in and they seed those areas, and the seed that they plant comes up pretty quickly. So that will help with it as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Great answers. So CR wants to know, is spotted lanternfly a danger here, and top remedies for eliminating, especially natural predators? What other problems to watch out here in North Jersey?
Well, I know oak wilt is always on the radar. I don't think it's a current problem right now, but it's something to keep an eye out for, just because when an oak tree gets oak wilt, it dies very quickly and can spread via roots to other neighboring oak trees. Spotted lanternfly, we don't know at this point in time. The research is still out. They seem to think that it's more of an agricultural issue, but I am cautiously I am unsure about that, because I just know from taking entomology that anything that pierces a tree into the bark can lead to secondary pests, which basically wind up killing the tree. The fact that spotted lanternfly is able to feast on upwards of over 70 different types of species of trees just basically says to me that we may not know just yet. It may not be a short-term issue if you have a spotted lanternfly infestation in your trees this year. It may be 5 or 10 years down the road as the fungus or the other secondary pests that get in there to take advantage of the piercing by the spotted lanternfly will actually kill a tree. So it remains to be seen how much of an issue it's going to be. It seems to me like it should be a dramatic issue, but again, that is still an open-ended question. I know right now it seems to be affecting Ailanthus. The only other species that I'm aware of that they are able to feast on all their different forms is black walnut. I know that they're also wreaking havoc with red maple and silver maple also.
Yeah. Okay, so conversation to be continued. And we'll try to, as an association, we'll try to keep everybody updated on any additional updates that we get. So that might be a backyard forestry unto itself at some point.
Yeah.
So, okay, because of the time, I'm going to take one more question, and then I want to read Daniel's thing. Or actually, with Daniel, I think I'm going to, he has some research that he's doing as it relates to beech leaf disease. So I'm going to pull that, and we'll be in touch, because I know you're looking for some connections. So we'll get back to you on that on a other note. But
I will say this much: at this point in time, I'm not aware of a treatment for beech leaf disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's still too new and still evolving. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions on beech leaf disease.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Rutgers is very much involved in doing that stuff. So we can see what we can hook you up to certain people. So then just real quick, last question before we wrap it up for the day, for the night, is Eric wants to know, what's the best all-purpose fertilizer for seedlings and saplings? Let's keep our regenerative forests happily growing. Any recommendations from you guys?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware. I'm not that much as far as the fertilizers are concerned. I know, believe it or not, down here, there's a lot of chicken farms, so they have a lot of chicken leftover stuff, if you will, that they use as fertilizer. Talking about chicken poop. Believe it or not, it's probably why the whole area smells like that. But anyway, yeah, I had recently given advice to somebody who's looking to replant their forest, and they were asking about fertilization, and I said, don't fertilize. Reason is that, you know, there is enough excess nitrogen in our environment that is basically getting into our waterways and killing our waterways. So I'm basically myself, I'm not an advocate of fertilization. But I know Lori does have some contacts who may be
Sorry.
able to help out with that,
Yep.
with the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association, which she's affiliated with. So
Yeah, sure. And I think, yeah, we can get you some resources for sure. Okay. One other thing is, John, are you willing to share some contact information? There's at least one person that wants to talk to you about forestry certifications and that kind of stuff. Are you willing to maybe an email?
yeah,
For
sure.
people? Okay.
Yeah.
So we can either, you can put it out now, or we can email everybody that was part of the webinar with usually send them the follow-up recording anyhow. So
Yeah,
however
yeah.
you want to do that.
Yeah. My email address is Hooven, HOOVEN, John, JOHN @gmail.com.
Okay, and I'm putting that in the chat right now. So it's Hooven John @gmail.com.
Yeah.
Okay. HOOVEN JOHN @gmail.com.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, I think we're done for the day. I know there's a couple questions we didn't get to, but just want to be respectful of people's time. Thank you. Very informative. And I guess hopefully we'll see everybody next month.
See some people on Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh, that too. Yep. All right. Take
Thanks
care,
for your time,
everybody.
everybody. I hope it was worthwhile for you, and thank you for your time.
Very good, John. Thank you very much.